And welcome back to FlashPOINT. The CIAA tournament is saying so long. Charlotte, it's been here in the Queen City for 13 years, but will not come back after its contract with the city ends in 2020. The tournament now headed to Baltimore and taking with it millions of dollars. Of course, we can't keep them all, but how do we lose this one?
Well, we lost it. It's, first of all, miraculous, and we should be appreciative of the fact that we will have had it for 15 years by the time it leaves in 2021. And the headquarters of the CIAA will still be here. These tournaments move around. The ACC tournament, any other conference basketball tournament moves around. Historically, the CIAA had moved every 4 or 5 years to a different city, usually in the Virginia, North Carolina area. So this isn't unusual. This isn't completely unexpected. Sometimes people want to change the scenery. I think we'll continue to be competitive in bidding for it going forward. I think Baltimore will be maybe a nice change of scenery for them, but they'll ultimately realize they had something great in Charlotte and want to come back.
So, you know, I totally agree with all those points. I think the one other thing is we're doing a lot of economic development focused initiatives this year. We have been for a while, but this is a big focus. And unfortunately, states all compete with each other and cities with taxpayer dollars. That's the way the world works. So we have to look at these on a deal-by-deal basis. And when you look at this and you say, okay, well, it generates $50 million of impact to Charlotte, which is huge, and I love that. But then you look at the deal, all right, so about just over half of that is in direct spending, which gets taxed. And between the 1% to 8% tax rates, that generates $2.1 million. This costs us $2.6 million to put on, and that doesn't include the city staff resources and overhead that comes along with that. So while it's great, and I love the impact that happens to businesses, when I look at a deal like that on its own merits, it's in the red. It's not something that that we need to go over the top and try to beat Baltimore out necessarily for, when it's not necessarily the kind of return we're looking for.
All right, now to our favorite topic here on FlashPOINT now, and not gerrymandering. Instead, scooters. That's right. Charlotte City Council, including the gentleman to the right of me, started looking at new rules when it comes to those popular scooters you see zipping around Uptown, South End, around the Queen City. All right, so under the new rules, speeds would be capped at 15 miles an hour. Scooters would be banned from sidewalks on certain roads, including Stonewall, College, 7th, Church Streets, that was uptown. Also, users wouldn't be allowed to ride on streets that have a speed limit over 35 miles an hour. Anybody who breaks one of these rules would face a penalty. The Charlotte City Council is going to vote on the rule changes coming up in the next few weeks. All right, I know, Tark, you've been sort of integral in sort of crafting this. Why is this so difficult?
Well, you know, that's an
$1 million question.
That is an excellent question.
We've been talking about this now for 8 months.
I think one of the things is, I think, you know, we've taken a slower path to figure out the end state of this and let a pilot process run so that we didn't impact these innovators from being able to operate on our streets while giving us time to figure it out. So there's a little bit of a good reason for it. You know, I think what we've done so far and what we're poised to do now is really cutting edge from a global perspective. All the other cities, from what you looked at, San Francisco or Atlanta, all these other folks that they're really in the mix of this, they've been taking an approach that puts government in the middle of this and makes government the client. Well, we don't like you, we'll give you a permit, all of these things. Our approach is about a dynamic cap, a dynamic fee structure, and allows the Charlotte citizen and the Charlotte rider to be the ones that get to vote with their dollars and who they like best, and we get to put some little incentives around the edge to say, we'll give you a fee break if you don't park it in these areas or you convince your riders to use helmets. I think that's the way it needs to be, but it's slow going, unfortunately.
Tark might be a little close to this subject. He's spent the last several months on it.
Well, in the time that we've all collectively spent on scooters, I would have thought we could regulate space travel.
Right.
So it's something we need to put a bow on. And I think the streets you mentioned are actually the parameters of what would be considered a central business district, wherein you could not ride on the sidewalk in any portion of that long rectangle. And then I've got some concerns around the speed limit cap that we've put on the roads people can ride them on. We need to increase the infrastructure investment on sidewalks and on bike lanes, and that's where bike lanes is ultimately where we want these scooters. But our bike lane infrastructure is so insufficient right now that we need to give people options, and in some cases they're just going to need to be on a 40-mile-an-hour road. It's not ideal, but other than controlled access interstates and highways, you know, we really ought to give people the option to get where they need to go on these.
The cycling community on that point has some very valid concerns of the downstream impacts on bikes we could have if ultimately we do that. I think it's really valid. Larkin and I talked about it at great length on our podcast.
Oh, R&D and the QC.
Oh, yes.
Please,
yes,
please.
yes.
Would you like to go ahead and plug your blog too?
Yeah, I'll definitely read Long League Politics as well. But I just don't think scooters are a big of a problem that require this much city council time. You know, unfortunately, what we're seeing across North Carolina is that cities are kind of seeing these scooters, which are clearly solving a problem, you know, when you see how much demand there is for ridership.
Sure.
But cities are seeing these as kind of a cash grab. How much money can we get from these companies instead of, you know, trying to incentivize, you know, these to be a solution.
And the average ride is 1.4 miles. So this is not people riding instead of walking, it's people riding instead of driving.
Yeah, and I mean, look at the beards on the three of us here. We know what we're talking about. This is right in our demographic.
I know what that
I draw the line at the beards. I won't do that. All right, more Flashpoint after this.